Long ago, Indians came to this valley to pick berries and to race their horses on the flat, cleared land. On one of their trips to the valley, a child became lost and could not be found. The Indians thought that evil spirits had taken her away. Afterwards, they called this place Yacolt, which in the Klickitat language meant Haunted Valley. Some of the earliest settlers of the Yacolt area before 1900 were Garner, Weber, Snyder, Heitzhausen, Crouch, Henkel, Wood, Meyer, Farr, Landon, Cherry, McCutcheon, Winfrigler, Gilbert, Solly, Lavendor, Juggler, Farmer, Liff, Stassert, Wilson, Hazelhorst, Bannon, Schumacher, Bogardus, Smith, Burlingame, Rocci, Niederhausen, and Wise. A.P. Farr built his home on the prairie just south of the present town of Yacolt. The pioneer Lipp family also homesteaded land near Yacolt. Here they built a log cabin which later became the home of Mrs. Marie Johnson Womack, the mother of Mrs. John Rinta. Marie Womack inspects the Lipp log house as it appeared in 1966. Rudolph D. Niederhausen was clearing his land for farming in 1891. Edgar Rocci built a cabin in 1892, but it burned to the ground that same year when a slash fire got too close. He immediately built this second cabin where the neighboring Gerber family posed for a picture. It was hard work clearing land for farming at the Rocci homestead, which was located between Amboy and Yacolt. Edgar and his boys, Sam, Ed, Jack, and Henry, show the tools that they used. Edgar sits at his table in the winter of 1894-95, composing music to play on his violin. He once told his wife to be sure to save the music tucked inside the cover of a book should the cabin ever catch fire. Ironically, when the house did burn in 1907, the sheets of music were not in the book, as Mr. Rocci had put them in a safer place and forgotten to tell his wife. In the late summer and fall of 1902, terrible fires swept westward from Bonneville toward Yacolt, destroying billions of board feet of timber in the homes of settlers. Those who could fled to creeks and rivers, some first burying their treasures in trunks in the ground. The Eatons dug a trench in which they buried goods from their new store in Yacolt, but the town was spared when the wind shifted and sent the flames toward Mount St. Helens, where, with the help of rain, the fire burned itself out. The forest was so devastated by this fire and others that followed in 1910 and 1929 that some called it the Devil's Toothpick Farm. Here, members of the Garner family gather around a charred stump along the Lewis River. People began to come to the area to salvage the virgin timber, some of gigantic dimension. Industry rose from the ruin and logging became big business in and around Yacolt. Tent camps were set up throughout the hills as the loggers chopped and donkey whistles blew. After a hard day's work, the sourdough's meals tasted pretty good. Weyerhaeuser, the largest of the timber companies, set up camps such as this to harvest the burned timber before it spoiled. Loggers stood on springboards to use their axes and handsaws to fell the big trees. Horses or oxen were often used to pull logs out of the woods on skid roads. Steam donkey engines on sleds such as this replaced the use of animals in skid roads. The building of rail spur lines and the use of a spar tree and steam donkey made it easier to get the huge logs out of the woods and to the mills. There were many small sawmills near Yacolt, such as those run by Dieterich, Dante, Hayes, McFarland, Thomas, and Christian Poppy between 1903 and the 1920s. This is the crew in the Dieterich mill yard. As a precaution against fire, barrels of water were sometimes kept on the roofs of the sawmills. The Lucia Lumber Company set up operations at Lucia Falls before 1895, selling out to Fred Kettenring just before the 1902 fire. Kettenring, in partnership with Frank Houston, also operated a good-sized sawmill on Rock Creek in Dole Valley. The houses in the background were for workers and their families. A closer view of the Dole Lumber Company sawmill shows the flume at the lower left, which sent the rough lumber down to the planing mill and loading dock at Moulton near Yacolt. Though commonly known as a Moulton Mill because of its nearness to Moulton Falls, the Dole planing mill was actually on Big Tree Creek Falls at the junction of today's roads to Dole Valley and Yacolt. The Moulton Mill and bunkhouses as they appeared in 1919 are shown in this drawing by Charles E. Church, whose father worked at the mill. The dam on Big Tree Creek provided power for the mill. The flume brought in lumber and logs from the upper Dole Mill. Other mills also use flumes such as this to transport logs to the mills and cut lumber and railroad ties to the railroad loading areas. The Murphy Timber Company built a sawmill 1 1/4 mile west of the town of Yacolt on property now owned by John Rinta. Murphy's operation was second in size only to Weyerhaeuser's Twin Falls Logging Company. Marie Johnson Womack gets a closer view of the Murphy Mill, which burned to the ground in 1925. Jens Jorgensen built his sawmill in the town of Yacolt along Yacolt Creek. He cut ties for the railroad and lumber for the growing town. This pile of rubble is all that remained of the Jorgensen sawmill in 1965. However, still standing nearby is Jorgensen's barn, bearing witness to life and farming of another generation. Horse harness and a huge loft for hay tell the story of the early 1900s. A steam bathhouse can be seen to the left of the barn. After a long day's work at the sawmill, family members could relax as they poured water over the hot rocks and baked the tiredness from their bodies. Before the timber could be economically removed from the area, it was necessary to construct a railroad. This railroad was called the PV&Y, which stood for Portland, Vancouver, and Yacolt Railroad. The railroad tunnel just south of Yacolt was constructed between 1902 and 1903. It was sometimes necessary to build trestles across ravines. This trestle, known as High Bridge, was near Yacolt. It was burned in a fire started by sparks from a steam engine. A Shay engine huffs and puffs as it takes its load of logs down to Yacolt. Here, many railroad spur lines from the logging camps connected together. Another train with its load of logs comes to get a drink at the water tower. The Yacolt water tower held enough water to fill several steam engines. At least one logging train a day left Yacolt for the mills in Vancouver. Trains such as this carried out 10 million board feet of logs a month in 1909. But the days of the steam engine are gone. The caboose signals the end as a diesel train leaves the town of Yacolt carrying wood chips and plywood from the International Paper Company mill at Salachi Prairie in the 1960s. No longer does the train stop in this community to take on water, passengers, or logs and lumber. Those days are now part of history. The town of Yacolt had a rather uncertain start. W.H. Garner wanted the town, which he named Garner's, to be located on his land on the north side of the Yacolt-Garner Road. A corner of the Garner homestead, now occupied by the school at lower left, is shown in this 1954 air view of the town. For a time, Beulah J. Atherson operated the Garner's post office in this log building on the north side of Garner Road just west of the present primary school. But Charles C. Landon, who lived on the south side of Yacolt Road, decided the town should be on his land. Landon drew up a plat and began selling lots in the town he named Yacolt. This abstracted title describes property on the southeast corner of Cushman and North Amboy Streets, which was part of his original homestead. Edward Alonzo Eaton built the first store in the new town of Yacolt in 1902 on West Yacolt Road, but soon moved it to face the railroad tracks on Railroad Avenue. A false front can be seen on Eaton's store at its new location to the right of the train water tower. The influx of loggers in the building of the railroad after the terrible 1902 forest fire made Yacolt into a frontier boom town. Railroad Avenue, with its saloons, restaurants, barbershop and bath, and hotels, was a busy place when the loggers came out of the woods. W. E. Gannon's saloon and restaurant attracted many a logger's boot. But over a half-century later, in 1966, after a succession of proprietors, it had outlived its time and was torn down. George Gassaway's saloon on the other side of the railroad tracks had a corner entrance with double doors. The inside of Gassaway's saloon shows the bar with its footrail. This building later became the Yellowstone, owned by Ralph Moon, or as some called it, the Moon Saloon. Other early saloons were run at various times by Dan Poppy, John R. Gannis, Clark, Fred McDermott, and Cal White. Trade coins such as these hickeys were used in saloons and some other businesses in Yacolt's early days. Business was also good for Yacolt's 4 hotels. At one time, the Yacolt Hotel, owned by Boss Williams, was under fire for failing to observe liquor restrictions, but no action was taken by county officials because it wasn't any worse than similar spots. The Lewis Hotel, believed to have been built by Mr. Rush in 1903 and later owned by Mrs. C.J. Strode, was next to the Yacolt Hotel. The other hotels were the Park, originally named the Connell, and the Western. The Western, which was converted to apartments by Robert Faring, burned in 1962. Looking north along Railroad Avenue can be seen the Yacolt and Lewis hotels at the left, several buildings which over time served various purposes such as a barbershop, a restaurant, drugstore, newspaper office, and bar. The railroad depot is on the far right. The Yacolt Depot on Railroad Avenue was bustling with activity when the passenger trains arrived from Vancouver in 1909. The barber shop was owned by Joe Reedus in 1913. He also offered customers a place to bathe. Sam Bunyan was doing a good business in his restaurant between 1913 and 1915. This is the former Hope Drug Store as it looked in 1966 when it was being used as a library and office for the Yacolt Enrichment Program. By the 1990s, none of the original business buildings on Railroad Avenue were still standing. P. Heitzman set up an office to take advantage of the booming real estate business and offered loans, insurance, and his services as a notary. The bakery, 2 doors down, seemed like a good place to seek shelter after this snowstorm. Commercial activity also boomed on Yacolt Road. Ben Bell opened a general store where the motel is today. He sold groceries, shoes,